All right, Catch, we ready to roll? We ready to go?
Absolutely.
Every weekend of the college football season, you watch this guy give you all the highlights, and then if you want, you can watch it again. You can watch it again. Then 8 hours later, it'll roll again because that college football final show, I record it like 8 times every week just to make sure I get it because they run it all over the place. Plus, he was part of the breakdown show on Sunday after all the craziness of the CFP. He is the one and only Matt Barrie. Nice enough to give us some time once again. How are you, brother?
Gentlemen, good seeing you. Happy holidays. Sad that the college football season is over and the regular season, but man, I can't wait to get going on bowl games, the college football playoff, and everything in between.
What are you going to be doing for what are you doing specifically during bowl season?
So bowl season, I'm calling 2 games with Dan Mullen. We're going to be doing the Boca Bowl. I believe that is Syracuse, USF on the 21st. Then we're doing the Duke's Mayo Bowl, West Virginia, North Carolina. And then I will do studio, my typical college football studio in and around the playoff and then around the New Year's Six. And then this kind of the bowl games in between.
All right, so now we get to the most important question that I didn't know we had to ask. But Matt Barrie, are you going to be asked to eat some of that mayonnaise on TV? And if so, what will you do?
Man, I am not touching mayonnaise on TV. I'm just not touching. Look, I'm very well aware of what people did in the past. I'm not going to be one of them. I am not going to be one of them.
I'm on team Matt Barrie on that one. Like, a man's got to have a code. And if the code doesn't include mayo, it never changes.
I mean, look, end of the day, we can put it on a sandwich, but to eat it with a spoon or do some of the ridiculous stuff other people were doing, not doing it. I will not do it. But I will support the bowl game however they ask me to.
Yeah, and if I'm Mac Brown and somebody tries to pour mayonnaise on me if they win that game, I'd just revoke the Scully. Like,
I'm losing my Like, nah, nope, not doing it.
No, we're done. We are done. Matt, give us a Texas perspective to get started. Before we talk about the sort of controversy of everything, talk about the show Texas put on against Oklahoma State and whether or not you definitely thought that put them in.
Yeah, I mean, I said it on Saturday night that Texas was in. I said that going it, like, at the end of the day, I really, really thought this is what it was going to be. We knew Michigan was in. We knew Washington was in. I said Texas was in, and the debate was going to be between Florida State and Alabama, and that ended up being what happened. Texas had the best win of the regular season. It's not debatable. They had the best win of the regular season. They are loaded with talent. They've got an SEC roster ready to roll into that league, and they had one trip up in a rivalry game in a neutral site against Oklahoma. And look, here's all you had to say. You needed to see them dominate a team that they were clearly better than in Oklahoma State. Well, what did they do? They dominated them. I mean, that thing wasn't even close. And so for me, it was never a debate over Texas getting in. I thought they were one of the 4 best teams in the country. I've been steadfast in that for quite some time, that Texas was one of the 4 best teams in the country. And I'm glad at least the committee got that part right. Because, guys, I said it on Sunday during the selection shows. Right now, on all cylinders, if there's one team clicking on all cylinders right now that I would take to win the national championship, it would be the Longhorns.
Well, Matt, what's interesting about that is that for after the Oklahoma game for about 5 or 6 weeks, Texas was winning games, but they obviously go through the Quinn Ewers injury. There were games against Houston where they weren't out of this world good. Even against Kansas State, where you're playing a really good team who's ranked, they held on for dear life. How important were the last 2 games where they beat Tech 57-7 and then they beat Oklahoma State the way they did? If they just win those games 7 points or less, how different do you think the conversation would have looked like this weekend when talking about whether or not they should be in against an Alabama team or even a Florida State team that kind of had the way they were beating teams come under such a microscope?
Yeah, and I'd say even maybe a Georgia team, right?
Yeah.
We can get into that in a minute. But look, I think it's impossible. And this came up a lot, and I kind of shove it aside because everyone's like, well, Alabama needed a Hail Mary to beat Auburn. Yeah, they did. It was a rivalry game. Well, Washington needed a whatever to beat Washington State. Yeah, it was a rivalry game. But big picture, teams are going to have close calls throughout the year. You guys know that. It's impossible to blow out 12 teams on your schedule. It's absolutely impossible. Look at Michigan. I don't think Michigan blew one team out that wasn't I mean, their non-conference schedule is a whole other conversation, but no one was really blowing people out the way that everyone thought that they should. And so for me, for teams, it's, can you find a way to win the game? Can you find a way to win the game when it's close? And for Texas, yeah, the Kansas State game probably shouldn't have come down to the way that it did, but it did. And they found a way to win the game. And so they passed every test minus the Oklahoma one. And then as you brought up the final two, they left no doubt. And what do we know about the end of the season? If it's a playoff bid, if it's a Heisman Trophy vote, people remember the last thing you see. And the last piece of work that Texas put on tape was in a holiday weekend and Thanksgiving weekend. They had the audience to themselves. They beat the hell out of Texas Tech. And then on Championship Saturday, they were the noon Eastern game. And so everybody got to see it for themselves. Quinn Ewers was setting records by the half. The skill players, CJ Baxter, these backs, I don't know how Sark has all these backs. And they put the last thing on tape of, this is a really good football team. And so struggles throughout the year. Alabama could have lost to USF. I mean, they could have if you go back and watch that game. So I don't put much stock into the close games. I put much stock into, can you finish and win? And then the last two things we saw were dominant. I wasn't surprised at all.
So, Matt, I always feel bad when guys like Booger McFarland or RG3 are on TV talking about, we don't want it to be a pageant. And I always think, well, I don't either, but that's what it is. And starting next year, we'll have a football discussion, but we have to have the pageant discussion as long as we're in a pageant. So for me, I think that's probably the four teams I would have put in if I'm asked to do it. Give us your thoughts on, since it played out that way, and we know they were doing the Florida State Bama thing. And like you said, maybe there is a Georgia argument to be made. How did you go over it in your head? And as painful as it would be to tell, Jordan Travis why it has to happen, would you have done the same thing? Would you have made Bama the fourth team?
So there's two parts to this. One, I take exception with the people saying that the committee did the easy thing. They did not do the easy thing. The easy thing would have been Florida State. The easy thing would have been Florida State and said, hey, look, Michigan, Washington, Texas, Florida State. Well, why not Alabama? Well, Alabama's ranked 8th. I know they just beat the number 1 team in the country, but Texas beat them head-to-head, and Florida State's a 13-0 Power 5 champion. They're in. That would have been the easy thing. They did the hard thing by putting Alabama in, knowing the problems that it was going to cause. Now, two things can be true with this conversation, and I've been consistent with this throughout. I know because I work for ESPN, people are going to blame us and somehow blame me. But there are two things that I believe to be true. The first is I cannot wait for these games. These are 4 damn good football teams and probably 4 of the most talented and best teams in the country right now. That's part one. I'm excited for these playoff games. Part two is Florida State got screwed. And you can have both. And I say screwed because the committee boxed themselves in, and they did with TCU back in 2014, and it made no sense. TCU in the penultimate rankings back then was 3rd, going into the penultimate rankings, going to play Iowa State when Iowa State was bad. Well, they went and beat the hell out of Iowa State and dropped from 3rd out of the rankings. Well, why? If they were good enough to be 3rd, knowing a win was coming, why did you put them 3rd? And that's what I'm saying about Florida State. If they were 4th in the penultimate rankings, and then on top of that, they got a conference championship without losing, why now they've fallen back when they didn't do anything to fall back? So there are so many different ways to look at this. Again, I love these matchups. I love the games. I love Michigan, Alabama. I love Texas, Washington. But I also know that Florida State got hosed. And so you can look at it both ways. Here's the other thing. The reason this is now becoming a huge conversation is because the first time in a decade relative to the first year, what did you think was going to happen when you had a 4-team playoff with 5 power conferences? The only reason this hasn't been an issue is because the Pac-12 has been garbage for most of the time. That's it. That's the only reason this hasn't been an issue. Well, final time this is 4. Well, guess what? You got 5 really good Power 5 conference champions, and you were put in a bind. And the last thing I'll say about it is the one thing I don't like, but I get, the injury to Jordan Travis is why they don't believe Florida State belongs in the playoff. we're all football people, right? We all have eyes. We can see that Florida State was not as good of an overall team without Jordan Travis. The thing that I hate about that is for the rest of his life, he's going to feel like he's at fault for taking a playoff spot away from Florida State for the rest of his life. And so I could explain this from 17 different tentacles, but the bottom line is this. Can't wait to watch the 4 games. Also think Florida State got screwed.
Matt, Chad and I are both big advocates of 12 teams, in part because you look at next year when we get to November 1st and 12 is playing 18, and where that might be a game that normally, well, it's not top 10 teams, so our focus will be on something else. Where everybody seems to think that the regular season will be devalued, I tend to think that it makes a ton of games way more valuable than they've ever been before, and that we'll go into each week next season where there's 7 to 10 games that have all kinds of implications on eventually getting to 12, which makes like a college football final show even more badass because it's not like there's 2 or 3 games suddenly that we're looking at. There's an entire calendar full of games. Where do you stand on 12?
You took the glass half full approach because I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of those games where you're going to look and typically you'd say, well, I mean, one team's in and one team's not, so why are we watching? So there is going to be that approach to it. Where it becomes an issue, let's just take this year as an example. What was the SEC championship going to mean if both Georgia and Alabama are in? Well, the game between Ohio State and Michigan just becomes a game because they're both in. And so there's 2 ways to look at it. I've always said the 4 thing always was weird to me just because I had mentioned earlier with the Power 5. I believe this, that if they'd have kept this, if they'd have started this at 8, if this would have been 8 teams from the get-go, we're never expanding. We're never having these conversations. It's going to be 8, and it was going to stay at 8. Because I think 6 may have been a too little, and I think 8 would have probably been just right because you get your Power 5s in, you got some at-larges in a group of 5 team, and everybody would have been happy. Now, knowing college football, people are going to be bitching and moaning about the 12-team playoff as well. So, but I think 8 was probably the right way to go. But I think that the 12-team argument or the 12-team playoff is going to be interesting because there will be games that, as you mentioned, Ketch, that typically will be rendered other than just a rivalry game that might have a little bit more juice to it. But I don't think, this is a sport where the newspaper writers used to crown national champions. Yeah. And then we went to the BCS and people weren't happy. And then we went to the 14 playoff and people weren't happy. We'll get to the 12 team and they'll be finding reasons for people to complain. But at the end of the day, it's better than, the AP has awarded Penn State the national championship trophy, which, by the way, I wouldn't be surprised if Florida State wins the bowl game that they don't even claim a national championship, or the writers find a way to write him in as a national champion.
They probably should. Yeah.
Right. Why not?
I wouldn't be mad at it. It'd just be funny.
Yeah. At least next year.
UCF did it. UCF, I called a game at the Bounce House. There's a national championship thing at their stadium. So why wouldn't Florida State do it if they're 14-0?
Yeah, they absolutely should. Next year's the first year where the system has the right number of spots. Like we haven't had the right number of spots for 120 years or whatever. So claim all you want to claim. Matt, in terms of that game in Atlanta, just to the Georgia discussion, because I think we might agree. I would favor Georgia against Florida State. I think I'd pick them to beat Michigan if they played right now. And so the dogs are the dogs. I'm a little surprised they're out, but they lost the game. Do you think how they lost that game factored in? Ketch has brought up that discussion since the game. Did that feel like a wounded bunch of Bulldogs to you? Did it feel like for you they should be in? I mean, a 4-team is one thing, but I know they should be in a real playoff. But did you think there was any kind of argument for, hey, they're one of the best 4 teams?
Oh yeah. Because here's how I would say it. Like, how do you, this is another thing that drives me nuts about the system, but it's what we have. How do you go from being the number 1 team in the country?
Yeah.
The number 1 team in the country for all this time. You've won 29 consecutive games. You've won 2 national championships in a row. You're the number 1 team in the country. You lose one game by 3 points, now you're sixth. Like, so, yeah, I mean, yeah. So were they not that good, or were they that good? Do they have as much NFL talent as anyone? And then why is Florida State like it did? Like the committee boxed themselves in with the rankings the way that they did it. If you weren't sold on Florida State, you shouldn't have put them at 4 at the end of the season. If you thought Alabama could jump from 8 to 4, which has never happened, no team has jumped from the final rankings from below 6 into the top 4. If you thought that can happen, then they shouldn't have been 8th. So how do you go from the 8th best team to the 4th? Or how do you go from 1 to 6? And that's the point of the system that was really confusing. They kind of talking out of both sides of the mouth. But yeah, to answer your question, Chad, yeah, you could make an argument they were one of the 4 best teams. And Kirby Smart said something that was really smart, pun intended. Go ask NFL GMs who has the most talent in the country. And they'd look right at Georgia and they'd be like, that team.
Yeah,
it's insane.
And if you ask Jim Harbaugh who he wanted to be the 4 seed, if you had him write it down, he would write Georgia. There's no way he writes that name.
Or Alabama.
Yeah.
Or Alabama. Right. They don't want that. They don't want any part of Alabama, because I think there's people that think that Michigan, well, they played in the Big Ten, and the Big Ten guys, let's be real fair with each other. The Big Ten top to bottom is not a strong league. I think I looked the other day, and 10 of the 14 teams in the Big Ten have 6 wins or fewer. And that was the resume. I think it's going to be an Alabama-Texas rematch in the national championship, and we'll get to see this thing once and for all.
Yeah,
well, Matt, awesome. You just touched on one of the things I was going to ask you about, kind of a 2-part question. The first part just being quarterback related. All 4 of these teams got guys. I mean, Penix is the lowest rated from a passing efficiency standpoint, but he's going to be at the Heisman ceremony. Is there a quarterback today that, if you had to pick from these 4 teams, you think is most capable of going on a MVP? They're the MVP of the semifinal, MVP of the championship, and they're just the best guy in the moment. And you mentioned you think it's going to be a Texas-Alabama rematch. Mm-hmm. Is it because that kind of bleeds into Milroe and Ewers, or is it a little bit more than that?
Yeah, so the best quarterbacks are coming in the Texas-Washington game. Okay. Milroe at any given time is the best player on the field. If they just wanted to run Milroe, I mean, I saw him in person. I called the Alabama spring game a couple of years ago, and I was walking the sidelines, and I was like, what is that? Like, that's the backup quarterback? I mean, he's an absolute freak. And so at any given time, used properly, he's the best player on the field. J.J. McCarthy's too up and down for me. They run Blake Corum. They run Donovan Edwards. They find a way to do something with the running backs out of the backfield. Maybe Robin Wilson has a good game, but at the end of the day, if JJ's not on, he's just okay. And then there's sometimes he's great. In the Washington-Texas game now, Penix puts balls where only his receiver can catch them, maybe better than any quarterback in the country. The game, they throw that sealed the Apple Cup that he put, I mean, he threw it. There was a defender on his receiver, and the way that he put it in there, I mean, you're just looking at it like, how did he make that throw? And he does that quite a bit. Now, he is susceptible to playing down a little bit, like we saw against Arizona State. We saw it in the Apple Cup. We saw it against Stanford. Sometimes he'll look up and then he'll look down, but for the most part, he's been brilliant all year. And I think the thing with Quinn, I think he throws the most catchable football of the 4 quarterbacks. And he finds a way to just put it where the guys need to be. It is just so catchable. If I had to choose one out of the whole playoff, based on his complementary cast, based on everything he's got around him, if I'm ranking the quarterbacks in the semifinals, I'm going Quinn 1, Penix 1A. I think they're really, really close, but I've seen more down out of Penix than I have out of Quinn Ewers. I would put Jalen Milroe 3 and probably J.J. McCarthy 4th.
All right, Matt, we have people paying money to get your thoughts on things. We got a $1.99 from Going for the Corner. What happened to Matty and the Caddy?
Matty and the Caddy still very much alive and well. They do not have the audio version of it anymore, but we do the YouTube version of Matty and the Caddy come golf season. So we take the hiatus from football season just because I don't really have time to sleep during football season, much less talk about golf with Caddy in the middle of the fall. So we'll be back up and running soon. Probably at the turn of the year, Matty and the Caddy will be back in full force.
What's my man's name now? It's Michael something, right?
Michael Collins.
How great a guy is he to hang out with? Because it feels like he's the guy you want to hang with.
Oh, he's the best. We typically have a good time when we hang out. We'll leave it at that. We play in a lot of these winter and spring tournaments down in Florida together. We've been a part of each other's debauchery for the birthday. So he's a great human being. He makes you laugh 99.9% of the time. Just make sure you're not taking a drink or taking a bite to eat when you're talking with him, because at some point you're going to spit it up laughing so hard.
That is great. That's good. So it's still out there.
We're alive and well.
Beautiful.
Are there any more super chats, or do I get to ask my last question?
Somebody asked a little bit of an X's and O's Texas question here. Let's throw it in. Buck Wild says, a year ago was wondering how to replace Coburn and Ojimo. Can Collins and Carter exceed expectations as Murphy and Sweat did? I'd like to get Matt's input. See this, Matt? They're just they want you to get down in the trenches here on the Texas D line if you can.
Look, here's what you've got to understand. When you're Texas, or even at Texas A&M from at some point, and I'll use Alabama and Georgia as another comparison. There are going to be big human beings playing up front for some of the top programs in the country. Texas has proven over the past 3 years of their ability to develop and put guys in there to make plays, to hold up against the guys they had before. I think Sark's one of the best recruiters in the country. I think Texas can probably go name their target in the transfer portal. So no matter what, whether you've got, and by the way, I got a great story about Sweat and the touchdown pass he struck a pose. We had Sark on College Football Final with us. Did you guys see this? When he said that he dropped it in the walkthrough?
Yeah.
And he's like, here's the deal, man. I'm calling this ball play during the game. If you make me look bad, your D linemen are never catching the ball again. And so I just think it's the culture that's been built there with the talent. And, we see it every year with Alabama and Georgia, and I use them because they're the standard. They don't rebuild, they reload. And I think Texas has proven over the past couple of years, based on some of the guys that you're naming and what we've seen come through, that's it. They reload, and barring any setback in coaching, I wouldn't suspect them of dropping off anytime soon.
Well, thank you, Buck Wild. Go ahead, Catch.
Well, we were talking about earlier in the show, Matt, that when we first had you on many, many, many moons ago, when you were at NBC in Dallas, there was always like a Cowboys conversation. Well, the Cowboys are taking on the Eagles. So if there's ever hey, can we go just for a moment, talk Cowboys? It is Cowboys Eagles on Sunday night. Just your general thoughts on where the Cowboys are going into this game and everything that goes with it.
So the worst thing that happened for the Dallas Cowboys is that the Eagles got absolutely obliterated by the San Francisco 49ers. That's the absolute worst thing that could have happened. I will say this for Dak, and I've gotten to know a lot about Dak from sitting next to Dan Mullen all year and just kind of the intricacies of his game and what kind of person he is. And you're going to learn a lot about the Dallas Cowboys in this 4 or 5 game stretch. And if we know the defense is good, Dan Quinn's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league, and Dak is all of a sudden playing within himself. And if the Cowboys want to be taken seriously, if they want people to say, you know what, they're a contender in the NFC, this is the week to do it. This is the time to do it against the Philadelphia Eagles team that was outright exposed against the 49ers at home in the weather. That had Philadelphia written all over it. The Niners came in, they're like, I don't care. Brock Purdy came in and did it. So I'm anxious to see the Cowboys during the stretch because I think they're a really good football team. But you guys know this, and I know this. Come December, there's always a different Cowboys team that shows up. And so is this year different? I think it could be, but you're going to find out in the next few weeks. That's why I'm excited for it, because I love this time of year in college football and the NFL. You find out who's real quick. Yeah. And that goes to the Dallas Cowboys this weekend.
Matt, I'm so glad you said December. I had the same feeling from all the way back in those days. I looked it up. Last 9 December games for the Cowboys, they're 8-1. Their last 9 games in these last 2 years, really good in December. It freaked me out too. I'm like, wait, aren't they always bad in December?
Yeah.
Don't they fall apart? 8-1 over their last 9 in the month of December. So let's see what they do. You're right about that game, though. Y'all realize that the Niners spotted the Eagles 6 points in the rain and then scored 6 straight touchdowns.
6.
6 in a row. 6
We are
touchdown
all
drives
Charlie
in a
Brown.
row.
We're all Charlie Brown, and the Cowboys are loosey with the football. And I hear Matt say they can be different, and that's the thing. We believe that
every year. We're like, this is it. In the time that I was in Dallas and I traveled with the Cowboys, those were the Romo days. Those were Romo, T.O., Jason Witten. I mean, they were loaded.
Yeah.
We'd get to November, December. They'd make the playoffs or miss the playoffs if you were Wade Phillips the one year, which they shouldn't have. And then you start believing, like, oh, they're going to win. They won the game at Philadelphia, I believe, is that one playoff year. Then we go to Minnesota with Brett Favre, and they get absolutely pummeled. And so you want to believe. I mean, it's the fact that it's been that long for the Dallas Cowboys, to me, is one of the great puzzles in all of sports.
Yeah, you're right. Matt, just one more from me.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Texas Bama. If you're right and they play again, I'm a fight fan, and I always love to see that second fight. Because I'm a believer in once you beat them, you're probably going to beat them again. But then again, if that second fight goes the other way, you need a trilogy, and we all know how that works. So give me a thought on that stage. Texas trying to win 2, Nick Saban trying to fight all the way back and avenge that loss, not to mention the whole history of Colt and the thing.
Well, isn't this the trilogy, though? This is the third game.
That's true. You could look at it as the trilogy if you want to go all the way back to the Colt game.
Last year.
What is or last year? I'm sorry. If you want, you're right. Last year,
Yeah.
Bama wins that. That'd be the trilogy. Okay. So this year, what's your Tuesday gut this far away from the game tell you? Does Texas get the win again?
I'm going to reserve my right to come back on here when the two teams win in the semis.
Okay.
Because I candidly, I don't know. Because I find Alabama to be the scariest team in the playoff. Well, why is that? Well, they've won 11 straight. They figured out how to use Jalen Milroe. And this is the kind of team, a la Jake Coker and Greg McElroy, where it was good but kind of unheralded. There aren't top 5 pick superstars, and he just loves coaching the hell out of this team. And they were told they don't belong in the playoff. That's the biggest thing. Alabama was told they don't belong. So I think they're scary. I think they're going to beat Michigan. Like I said, I believe Texas will beat Washington. But I will come back before the championship game and give you my honest opinion. Because also, if I'm Texas, you're like, oh, man, we just beat them by double digits in Tuscaloosa. We got to go through this again for the national championship. Like, we can't get Michigan. Like, we got to deal with Alabama. You don't want that if you're Texas. You just don't. So I hope I'm wrong. Maybe it'll be Texas and Michigan. But I think we are literally headed for a collision of it. Like, yeah. I mean, you're right, Catch. This would be it. This would be the rubber match of the series.
Yeah, it's true. Good.
Matt Barrie, he's a superstar at ESPN. We watch him 9 times every weekend on Game Day Final. Matt, man, always appreciate it. You're always fantastic.
Guys, you're the best. Anytime. I'm cheering. Look, I'm cheering for good playoffs. I think it's fun to. I said this about a few programs, and Texas is at the top of that list. When Texas is good, it's good for college football. When you see that burnt orange out there as among the top teams in the country, that means we're in a healthy spot. So can't wait to enjoy it with you guys. And I will keep up with my promise. If and when Texas wins, I will hop on championship week and give you the prediction.
If you end up playing in Mayo in any capacity, like we're gonna clown on you if it turns out in a couple of weeks you're like in a big old tub of it. Just so you know, be ready for that.
Listen, I've got damn good hair, and if it does stuff for the hair, maybe, but I'm not going to screw that up with Mayo.
Okay, fair enough.
See you, fellas. Happy holidays.
Thanks, Matt. Same to you. Oh, my God. He's one of the best. I just had to ask when he said the Mayo Bowl. They get weird at that Mayo Bowl catch. You've seen it.